When I was researching for the topic, I came up with this. Well, I didn't come up. I just found this word, this expression that I never heard of before. That Lovecraft's philosophies was called "quote unquote" cosmicism, which is basically describing this kind of cosmic insignificance. And once when we realized that in his writings, knowing the context of his miserable childhood and lifestyle, um, you understand why was he writing in the way he was writing. And by the way, I have to say, learning more about his life makes me doesn't make me happy he had cancer, doesn't make me happy he died in agony. It just makes me feel sad for him because it wasn't his fault what happened to his
Right.
family, to his parents, because that drove him to loneliness, depression, dark places, insanity, and drove him to use the God-given gift to think and to write. And instead of using that as something beautiful, he used it to write about this hopeless universe where you're insignificant. No one cares about you. It's even worse than God of deism. At least with God of deism, there was God who created you. He abandoned you, unfortunately, which sucks also. It's not true. But in his lifestyle, there was not even God. It's just like just this. You're cosmically insignificant. Like you are as important as I don't know, a dust on your table. That's it. There's no meaning in anything. So my heart just feels sad for him, even though he died,
Hmm.
and lived long ago. But I have to connect his childhood with his type of writing, because I tell my non-Christian friends, hey, when you read Tolkien, when you read C.S. Lewis, when you read Brandon Sanderson, you think just because you're not a religious person and you're just reading fiction. But let me tell you, all of these authors, they're inevitably led by their own experiences, beliefs,
Hmm.
or lack of beliefs. Um, the way how they grew up, schools, friends, everything. It's inevitable that in some shape or form you will portray that in your writings. Or if you're a sculptor or a painter, that's you can't escape from who you are and what is in your heart. That will show up eventually in
Hmm.
some shape or form. So I just want to say that I'm not surprised the way he was writing, because he just felt unloved, and everything was hopeless and dark for him. When it comes to his most well-known character in novels, and Kevin, we can again start with you. Can you please tell us which is the most famous character that Lovecraft invented? That even though we have some kind of cosmic fear of him, but we also, for
Hmm.
some weird reason, we love this creature.
Well, his most famous creation was probably Cthulhu, which, by the way, some people I already know are going to be in your comments section like, no, it's pronounced this other way. Lovecraft himself definitively said that it doesn't matter how you pronounce the name Cthulhu because it was never intended to be pronounced by the human tongue. So, checkmate, purists. But, um, so Cthulhu is his most famous creation, although depictions of Cthulhu almost always get him wrong. If you actually read the book The Call of Cthulhu, spoiler alert, when you get to the end of the book, Lovecraft gives a very brief description of Cthulhu, and in that description, he's this huge, fat, bulbous sea monster thing that doesn't really have any hands, just kind of reaches around with tentacles, is semi blind, and ends up just flopping into the sea, to the horror of everyone because now he's unleashed upon the cosmos. But depictions of him by modern people always have him like ripped and all the that's totally not what Lovecraft envisioned. He was disgusting to look at, um and I want to say that the reason why I'm keying in on that is because you just made a really excellent point. We do this thing where we recognize the intense terror of this great work of fiction. It really is an excellent book. It's actually it's not just one of the first cosmic horror books, it's also one of, not the first, but a very early example of taking detective fiction and turning it into horror. So brilliant use of different genres, brilliant. The story unfolds in a very brilliant way. He uses newspaper clippings, and this was not the way books were typically done back then. He's drawing very heavily on other great authors like Bram Stoker. But the difference is that as he's drawing on that, he's also taking away, when you read Bram Stoker liked to inject a lot of humor and goofiness and over-the-topness to his stories to make them a bit more palpable. H.P. Lovecraft doesn't do that. He wants you to be drawn into the story, but he also wants the full force of the terror to sink in, and he wants this creature that you're encountering, Cthulhu, to be so horrendous that when you whenever one of the characters in the story sees him, they actually go insane. Even just seeing Cthulhu sends you into complete insanity. So, which is why he gives such a brief description. I mentioned the description was brief. That's intentional. He doesn't want you to have a good visual of what Cthulhu looks like, because it's so much better if you have to imagine for yourself what Cthulhu looks like. But what he does give us is everything that revolts every person. Every person would rather see something ripped and muscular and lean and strong than see something fat and tumorous and slimy and bulbous and unpleasant to look at. And so I think that the very fact that we misrepresent Cthulhu in art shows how good that book really is, because we hate what Lovecraft created so much that we pacify ourselves by creating something similar but different enough that it doesn't scare us quite so much. And Lovecraft didn't do that for us. Lovecraft gives us this terrifying, disgusting thing. And then the reason why I think Cthulhu resonates with people on a different level, though, is because a lot of the other entities that are actually more powerful in the Cthulhu mythos are so far beyond us that we can't really even comprehend them. So like Yog-Sothoth, the father of Cthulhu, is an entity that is described in very godlike terms. He's all powerful, all knowing, or the blind idiot god. Azathoth is seen as this just sort of dreamer. He's just dreaming up the cosmos, and someday he'll probably wake up and everything will disappear. But he doesn't have any conception that we are real, so he couldn't care less about us. And just all of these entities. But what makes Cthulhu stand out is that Cthulhu is actually the high priest of this system. So there's a podcast, and I don't know if either of you two listen to it, but it's called Christ and Cthulhu. And it's this awesome podcast all about taking H.P. Lovecraft and analyzing it from a Christian perspective. And he analyzes all these different books. And in that podcast, he says that Cthulhu is actually the Christ of H.P. Lovecraft's universe. He is the priest that sort of is the go-between between us and these entities that are so far beyond us that it's scary just to think about them. And so it's actually really fitting that Cthulhu is the most famous artifact of Lovecraft's mythology, because Cthulhu is, in some sense, the closest thing to one of Lovecraft's gods that we could actually interact with. But the problem with that is that because of that, Cthulhu is also the entity that really enjoys sowing madness into people's minds, turning them into animals. And in the end of Call of Cthulhu, there is, everybody knows the first line from Call of Cthulhu where he says that it is a merciful thing that human beings aren't able to bring together all of our knowledge. But fewer people know the last line of Call of Cthulhu, which is actually an eschatology. And in it, he says, we had not defeated Cthulhu, we had only delayed the inevitable, because one day the stars would align again and the world would be bathed in a sea of debauchery and madness. So in the end, there's going to be, in Lovecraft's mythology, a second coming of the Cthulhu, that basically, like we have a second coming of Christ, they have a second coming of Cthulhu, but the difference is that Jesus Christ reshapes us into the image of God so that we become what human beings were originally meant to become. We were originally meant to be. We are united with God and we become more and more human. But for Cthulhu, he does not care about our humanness, and he sows in debauchery and turns us more and more animalistic, so that at the, we might say, second coming of Cthulhu, human beings lose all humanity and become no different than the grotesque creatures all around us that just live for their passions. So I find it very fascinating that Cthulhu is quite literally an antichrist. He is the complete antithesis of what Jesus Christ is. Jesus Christ is God become man so that we can be united with God. Cthulhu is an entity that is far beyond us and theoretically goes between us and these higher entities, but does not care about us or love us or have any goodwill towards us, but merely wills our destruction through a long series of well thought out institutions of complete madness. So that's kind of where I would go with that. Sean, I have been talking for a very long time, so if you want to take it away, you are more than welcome.
Well, so one of the things I got out of that was that Chibi Cthulhu is a more accurate depiction of Cthulhu than...
Yes.
So yeah, you're absolutely right. The ripped Cthulhu, that's totally not a thing. And in fact, his body is so membranous. It's just one big pustule that when they ram the ship into it, it breaks open like bladders, and there's this ick that's just going everywhere, and it's this wild, toxic gas. Yeah. And you're absolutely right when you're talking about Cthulhu as the Christ. Unfortunately, Lovecraft, I think, was a Nestorian, because you already have a trinity of outer gods with Azathoth, Yog-Sothoth, and Nyarlathotep. And Nyarlathotep, I kind of always thought of as that being the Christ figure, because he's kind of the face of the Trinity. Whereas Yog-Sothoth, definitely the Holy Spirit. He is the gate. He is the key.
Right.
And but then you have Cthulhu, and it's interesting because the elder gods are the ones that supposedly imprisoned Cthulhu, depending on which of the readers and which canon you're going to go with. But the elder gods imprisoned Cthulhu, whereas Christ beat the elder gods. They beat Cthulhu. Christ came from the heavens. Cthulhu also came from the heavens, but instead of returning to the heavens, he was imprisoned in the abyss. So that it kind of is like a descent into Hades and then an ascension, but he hasn't been allowed to ascend. So it's kind of like that stepping on Christ thing. And when he turns his followers, and the goal is that these things become like bestial, I kind of can see somebody who's coming from a very, liberal progressive background saying, yeah, Christian becomes sheep, like they go crazy, all this baptized and stuff, and so there's this element where his fear of other people was actually coming out through his myths. Like, yeah, these Christians are crazy people. Look what they're doing. And I don't know if it was intentional or not, but it definitely bled through. And so, yeah, you
Well,
do.
it's not just Christianity so he's expressing his fear also, because when you read Call of Cthulhu, he does have an actual religion around Cthulhu, and the description of that religion is really similar to a lot of shamanistic pagan kind of religions. So he's very much exposing, once again, his fear of kind of people other than, because you're right, he does look down on Christians, but he's not really afraid of Christians when he writes about Christians. And, this is going to be a little bit demeaning towards us, but he writes about Christians. He basically, not in Call of Cthulhu, but in other books, he talks about Christians being really lucky because they're so stupid that they don't know how insignificant they are, which means that they can just kind of live their lives in this, way that's just like they get to just live life and enjoy it. Whereas the people who know about all this terrible stuff, like the mad Arab Abdul al-Hazrat, they go insane because they know the truth, and the truth is terrifying. So anyway, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you.
No. And I wonder if when you're reading the Call of Cthulhu, because the last time I read through it, when there was that relief, the clay tablet relief of Cthulhu.
Yeah.
And it's describing him sitting with his claws on this pedestal and his wings touching the edge of the relief. Did you think of the Ark of the Covenant there and how it's like a backward symbol of the Ark of the Covenant? Instead of two, you have one, and one set of wings touching the edge. Yeah,
yes.
Dude, that's. I mean, Lovecraft was a genius. Because you're Orthodox, I know you'll appreciate this. Cthulhu's mother, Shub-Niggurath, she actually bestows upon her worshippers something called mother's milk, which then turns them into the little chthonic beings, or little Cthulhus. So as like a Virgin Mary figure of directing them to her son and then turning them into imagers of her son. It's like, dude, Lovecraft knew what was going on.